So I decided to make this video on tips for moving to Boulder, Colorado because I happen to be from Boulder. I'm currently living in Boulder, and as someone who was born and raised in Boulder, whenever I leave Boulder, I am sometimes shocked at the fanfare that comes with people knowing that you're from Boulder. The first time I think that happened to me, I was living in Washington, D.C. at the time, and I was at a party and I told a girl where I'm from, and she was like, oh my God, that is where I've always wanted to move. I've always wanted to live in Boulder. And at first I was like, what? Because part of me didn't even realize that Boulder was so well known, which as I say out loud, I'm like, how did I not know that? But yeah, Boulder has quite a lot of fantasy and just awesomeness built around it. And it's definitely a growing city that's grown a lot in the past few years. I mean, a few decades, let's be honest. But I really didn't want this video to be just like kind of regular old humdrum stuff about Boulder. I wanted to get into some deeper stuff so that it's not just like tips on moving to Boulder. It's a video that's going to help you realize if Boulder is the right place or not for you to actually move. And the reason I'm doing this is because of that like intense fantasy that some people have around this idea that if they move to Boulder, their life is going to become amazing. I've also been a part of that fantasy, not about Boulder, obviously, since I'm from here. I always wanted to get away from it, but you know, about other places where it's like that destination, like fantasy thing where we think we're going to have this amazing life once we get to a place. Sometimes we do, but not always. And there are things about Boulder in particular that can be difficult and not often talked about. So that's what this video is all about. The obvious things first. Boulder is a super beautiful city. It's very naturally beautiful. It is nestled right under the Flatirons of the Rocky Mountains in Colorado. It is so picturesque, and that might be one of the first things, I guess, that draws people into wanting to live here. It's also very clean. It is incredibly active. But Boulder's also called, by anyone who knows it, the Boulder Bubble, because the people who live here, we tend to live in this kind of isolated bubble that forgets about the outside world. It's definitely changing, but not as much as you might think. But as someone who grew up in Boulder, I definitely benefited so much from the natural wealth of the city that has contributed to having pretty good schools, a pretty low crime rate, and just all in all, just a clean, nice, picturesque, cool suburban city where people tend to be very health focused. So obviously the idea of living in a place that has all those things is like extremely attractive to a lot of people. But here are some things to consider when moving to Boulder. The first thing, which I'm sure you've already noticed because anyone who knows anything about Boulder knows that it is one of the most expensive small cities in the entire United States. To get a one-bedroom apartment in Boulder, you would be lucky to find anything inside Boulder proper that has rent that's beneath like maybe $1,500 a month. And it's getting to the point where now, even if you go outside of Boulder into Louisville, Lafayette, those are also becoming extremely expensive suburbs that used to be cheap. Not the case anymore. Longmont is also a place, it's a separate city with a separate like thing about it. But it's also becoming a lot more expensive. So if you are ready to move to Boulder, get ready to shell out some good dollars just to pay your rent. So expensiveness as the obvious thing aside, I really want to get into who is the right person to move to Boulder, and not in like a discriminatory sense, like only certain kinds of people should live in Boulder. It's more about who are the people who are really going to personally, like emotionally thrive here, and what are the kind of things that are going on in Boulder that might make it difficult for some people to really feel connected here. So the first demographic of those who would really probably do pretty well in Boulder are either young married couples with or without kids, Yeah, just someone who's in a couple. I think it's really great to move to Boulder with someone else, because I'm about to jump into my major red flag for anyone who is moving to Boulder. I guess I'm just gonna jump right into it, and that is single people moving to Boulder, and single people who move to Boulder and they don't have some other program or some sort of job that's going to kind of instantly plug them in. If you're a single person just moving to Boulder with nothing that you can attach yourself to here, you probably will have a difficult time feeling connected in Boulder. And I don't have a full explanation as to why that is, but I can speak a little bit to kind of the culture in Boulder, and yeah. The people in Boulder have a tendency to be very friendly, but kind of closed off. So if you're visiting Boulder, you know, people will say hi on the sidewalk. You know, people are generally very polite and friendly. But if you are trying to make close friends as someone who doesn't know anyone here, if you are someone who is looking for a mate, like say you're single and you're looking for someone to, you know, start a relationship with, those things can actually be slightly more difficult in Boulder, I would argue, than other places in the United States. And again, I wish I had a full explanation as to why this is, but I'm speaking from my own experience, and I'm also speaking from the experience of a lot of other people I've met single people who have moved to Boulder, tried to enmesh themselves in like a friend group or tried to find a partner, and for whatever reason, they became so disheartened and so just like disappointed that they eventually left Boulder within just like a couple of years, sometimes less. And I guess my theory for this is, I mean, honestly, Boulder is kind of cliquey. So that's why it's a great place for if you are either in a couple or you're like a small young family and you're moving here for a job and all that. That's great because you're gonna be kind of plugged into like the school system if you have kids, and that'll give you some community maybe, and then your job. There's so many big tech companies, like Google's coming in here and everything else. I don't even know because I'm not paying a whole lot of attention to it in Boulder, but I know there's a lot of big industries that are booming in Boulder. So people that are moving here specifically for Google or for whatever it is, that's going to really help them to get plugged right in because they're going to have that community that's kind of built into their job. The same goes for if you're coming to go to CU Boulder or Naropa. There's probably also some smaller colleges in Boulder because there's a lot of that, like massage schools and stuff. I know there's some. If you're coming for a specific program, like a master's program or a PhD program, that will probably also help you to feel like you have some community and will plug you right in. But like I said, if you're just kind of like on a whim, probably a millennial like me, and you're just like, I've always loved Boulder and I'm just gonna pack up and move there and just see what happens. I've just seen it happen so many times that those people tend to get really disappointed with Boulder. And it's not because of the beauty of it. It's not because of the mountains and all of the resources we have here and how clean it is. It's because it's really hard to find community here if you don't already have that. But I'm also willing to hear other experiences people have had. I'm saying this because this is something I've heard a lot in terms of feedback I've gotten about Boulder. Like I said, it's been part of my own experience as someone who, even though I grew up in Boulder, I left after college. I moved to DC for a while. And then when I came back to Boulder in my kind of late 20s, it felt like almost like I was moving here for the first time. Like a lot of my friends from childhood had moved on and stuff, which is normal. But since moving back in my 20s, I have had trouble kind of fully finding community in the sense that I easily found in DC, and maybe part of that was my job, who knows. So there's just something about Boulder, and it's just something that we've noticed. And so in not wanting to make this video like wholly negative, there are obviously a lot of good reasons to move to Boulder. And those are the reasons that people create these fantasies of Boulder about. There are so many cool things to do in terms of outdoor activities. that was something else I wanted to touch on, was if you're someone who considers yourself like a very much like an outdoor enthusiast, if you love skiing and snowboarding in the winter, and if you love hiking and exploring the mountains and camping and rafting and all that fun stuff in the summer, Colorado is amazing for that. Obviously, we have so many 14ers, we have so many trails, so many beautiful places to visit. So yeah, so Colorado is like heaven in terms of the outdoors that we have here. And if you are a really big outdoor enthusiast, that's another way to really plug yourself into community for sure. Speaking from my own experience, like I love hiking and stuff, but even though I was raised here, I never learned to ski, which is so weird. And my mom was raised here too. I'm like second generation Boulder native, and like I just never learned to ski. So I say all that because I know that there is a lot of community within kind of the outdoor enthusiast group. So if you want to join a climbing gym, or if you want to do outdoor bouldering and climbing, like there are so many people who are like, they dedicate like their lives to that basically. And if you are one of those people, you're going to fit right in. The other thing I'll say, since we're kind of doing these pros and cons and I'm kind of just thinking of them as they come, because I want to give you as much information as possible, but I'm just sort of going with the flow here, is there is not a lot of nightlife in Boulder. We have the Pearl Street Mall, and there's a lot of bars on the Pearl Street Mall, so it can definitely be like a fun place to go have dinner, you know, and have a drink maybe afterward if that's what you're into. But in terms of like real nightlife, like there's no like nightclubs or, you know, nobody is staying up after midnight in Boulder unless you're staying up to drink at a bar, and usually the people doing that are like the undergrad CU students, although I mean everyone does that sometimes, and the bars close at 2, so so nobody is staying up all night, like, you know, doing that kind of urban, you know, topping of bars. Wow, I sound so old, I don't even know like what to call it anymore, but there's just not a lot of that in Boulder. So if you are used to that being your way of like meeting people, that doesn't tend to work out super well in Boulder, unless you're like a CU undergrad. That's another demographic of people that that's kind of their own subset. Like, so obviously there's like hundreds of thousands of new CU students who come each year in the fall, and especially the freshmen, they kind of get this like built-in community and this built-in structure that comes with being a new CU student. And so for those people, like if you're one of those kids coming here for school, you're going to be just fine. Don't worry about it. But again, if you're kind of like you know, someone who's on your own and you just want to move here just because you want to move here, these are just things to keep in mind. Thinking about your own preferences, where you're coming from, what you're used to. If you're coming from a big city where you're used to a lot of kind of, you know, a lot of theater. There's not a lot of theater in Boulder. There's some. We have the Dairy Center, and they have definitely upped their ante and they're doing more stuff. But in general, like we don't have like a lot of the theater, even music. Although I guess music is definitely not bad. There's some good concerts occasionally, and obviously we're close to Denver, so you always can go there for music and for theater. But in terms of in Boulder proper, there's not a lot of culture of like museums and theater and concerts and like going out to dance and stuff. Like there's just not a lot of that in Boulder, but there are bars. So if you're into microbrews, you're into just sitting at a bar, that is definitely a big option for you. Okay, so I'm trying to wrap this up and make this concise. So Boulder is great for people who are moving here, again, either with a couple or married family with young kids. It's great to come here, especially for like the school system's great, you know, like starting like an outdoor healthy active life family school thing with kids is great. If you're coming here for a job with Google or whatever, like we have a lot of that here. There's a lot of people moving here for Google, so I get it. You got the built-in, you know, salary, you can afford how expensive it is here, and there's community, I'm assuming, within the Google tribe. But again, the things to keep in mind are, can you really afford Boulder, especially if you're moving here without having a job secured first, because it is so expensive here. And do you think that you will be able to build community here based on your interests, based on your personality type, based on what you know you like, and also just how you know you are. And then also kind of mentally preparing yourself for that it might be more difficult to plug yourself in here than you think. Like there's one story a guy had told, I read this online, so this is not a guy that I knew, but he was giving his appraisal of his time spent in Boulder. And he had said, I think he lived here like 9 months, and he said he moved here is like, he's a total extrovert, like he's moved around the country a lot, so he's used to like starting anew in new places. And he had said that Boulder was the worst place he had ever moved because like he just couldn't make friends. So even though he's like this natural extrovert and he would do the whole thing, he'd go out to Pearl Street, he'd like meet people, and like people again are very friendly. So when you talk to them at bars or whatever, like they'll be friendly, like they might even, you know, you exchange phone numbers or whatever. But it's just difficult to get close to people. Like he was saying he would like reach out to them and then it would like peter out into nothing. And this isn't just for dating, it was like for friendship too, which does not surprise me because again, like I grew up here, I've been here for a long time, and I've had similar experiences even as someone who's a native here. It's just like the way that we are, because I'm actually thinking about it, I'm like, you know, I am that way too. I can be friendly but closed off in that like I'm not like just plugging right into people and like, yeah, we're best friends now and we're gonna do all this stuff together. Like people are just a little more guarded in Boulder, and I don't know why. And I also say Boulder specifically because I don't actually think it's this way in Denver or even other parts of Colorado, like maybe, but I think Boulder is particularly like guarded for some reason, and I don't fully understand why, but it's just sort of like the way it is. So it's hard if you're like a total outsider, you don't have something to really anchor yourself to once you get here, whether it's school or a job. Just mentally prepare yourself that it might be difficult at first, but it also might not. Maybe you'll have a totally different experience. I just want to warn you because yeah, some people come here and it's been their fantasy to move here, and then all of a sudden they're just like crushed because they can't seem to make friends, and there isn't culture because like I said, we don't have like museums and theater, and we don't have a lot of like art shows and nightlife. Like there's a little bit of that, but it's not enough. So yeah. So weigh the pros and cons for yourself. And the last thing I'll say is, if you have had it in your heart that you've wanted to move to Boulder, it's just always been, you know, something you've dreamed about, then just freaking try it. Like just come and see if it's for you. Of course, I would recommend if you've never been to Boulder and you just sort of have this fantasy, but you've never actually even like been to Boulder yet. You know, obviously come visit, like get an Airbnb or something, or couch surf or whatever you want to do. And just see if it really it lives up to the fantasy in your head. And if you feel that like soul connection, like this is the place for you, then like trust that and just, you know, move here and see what happens. And if it doesn't work out, then yeah, you can always move on. So that's the last thing I'll say, in that like I don't want to totally discourage people who kind of fit into that demographic of being single or not really like having something to plug into once they get here. I don't want to totally discourage you from coming here. If you really do feel like Boulder is like your dream, you should just explore it and see what happens. All right, I think that wraps it up. Yeah, let me know in the comments what you think, and also if you've had really different experiences than the ones that I've talked about in this video. I am super open and very curious to hear what your experience of Boulder is, or if you have any extra advice about moving to Boulder that I haven't touched on, because honestly there's probably a lot of little nuanced things that are just good to keep in mind about what life is like living in the Boulder bubble.